So yeah, the length we're willing to go, but also the games we're willing to play. So all the games we play in so-called consensus reality create all this pain and have since the beginning of time. And then to create this other game called Family Constellation, and people are willing to play it to help people heal, just that intention is so healing. And why not play a game like that? And just watching people play the game like that and representing the past, you can see how them just moving in those ways, and that person watching and us all watching and engaging is healing. We're seeing this drama play out and healing it. You know, at one point I hugged a strange man and pretended to be in love with him to help someone else heal. And they put their hands out and ask permission for the other person to represent someone, so you get all this physical touch and the hug, like free hugs. That was cool. And some people really cried, and it's almost like they were able to cry for those people who couldn't cry. Crying now in the present for tears that weren't shed in the past. And sometimes that's what I feel like happens when I'm in the lower states and crying for almost no reason or feeling so much pain. It's like feeling the pain of the past. And I've talked about before how sometimes it feels like people are a vortex to, like, it comes upon them. It's extra pain from generations and all of humanity. That's what it feels like. It's so painful. It takes a lot more than personal pain from one's life to end up in something like suicide. It's like that pain of generations of all of humanity. And so for people to be able to cry like that as a representative of someone else's constellation, it really does heal. And watching them cry and listening to them, just, there was this huge compassion. I really felt it. And regular therapy is so logical and linear. This was a lot more interesting and fascinating and gave space for different things to arise in the brain than like the next logical step. And it wasn't linear. And yeah, I just felt like there's more chance to heal something when it's spontaneous like that. When it's not like directed logically and linearly by somebody. It's like you come to your own realizations instead of someone telling you what the best way to look at it is. Even though she was saying stuff and directing stuff and telling people to say things, and I was totally down for it. Like, it didn't bother me. I thought it was really fascinating. And it could be that a reason why this appealed to me is that I do read body language too, and read more into things. So this lady, that's what she was doing, is reading more into things and reading the body language and what was happening, and so much more that I'm not aware of. But I feel like she's aware of so much that we're not aware of, and so am I. So it felt like a safe space to be aware of more. And then when that more came in, it wasn't like strange, where did that come from? That's not true, that doesn't make sense, blah blah blah. It was, yeah, I really saw a lot of some of the states of consciousness I have, but then they're in the wrong context. They're not in a safe space, whether they're high states or psychotic, so-called psychotic states of trauma in the past. If they're not in a safe container, then yeah, it gets turned into like a mental illness. But this could be really helpful. And in this process for myself, it felt like subtly going into past associations and having them gently come up and have certain associations triggered by what was going on in the room, because we're all interrelated and nobody's story is private. So by them being vulnerable, I was able to process a lot too. I actually feel kind of like psychosis, a part of what I've experienced in psychosis, especially in the beginning, is sort of related to family constellation stuff. Because I felt my family constellation. I felt like who I was in the past, who blah blah blah, and how we've all been doing this dance with each other for thousands of years, even back to like native ancestry and blah blah. It was all there and I could feel it all. And this makes a lot of sense. It seems like certain members of the family constellation can feel it more, and those who can often get diagnosed with a mental illness, because it's really painful to have an awareness of a lot of this stuff and not really know how to give voice to it or say it. Like if I want to say like, oh, I'm my grandmother, well, how does that work? You were alive at 5 when she died, and like, well, it works like this. Well, no, it doesn't. Or, you have to explain it. But in that context, she didn't have to explain things. That's the thing. It was a safe space for it to be relatively true, and everyone was open and curious and not thinking like, well, that's not true. I better check on ancestry.com or something. Like, people just went with it, and it was really powerful. So yeah, there's no cause, so we may as well have fun with all the drama, which I said. And aren't we tired of the drama? It's making us sick. We can have fun with the drama and then get into the present moment. It's better to have fun with the drama in a safe space like that and then be in the moment than having the drama affecting us out of context in our daily life. So that's how I can see this whole safe container thing. I gotta remember that safe container. And reading body language and then nonverbal, and I just really like the whole like bringing it beyond the personal self, saying this happened because of this in a past life or that in a past generation, rather than I'm sorry or I'm a bad person or blah blah blah. Like, it's more interesting. The logical explanation makes it kind of ugly. It's like trying to figure out the logic to explain. Most people don't like that at all. The other way it was kind of like psychosis, was in psychosis in those scary states. People around you literally respond to your state of mind and do weird stuff. It's like the morphogenetic field of psychosis makes people like attack you, makes people send you mean texts who wouldn't usually send you mean texts. Like, this has happened to me so many times. I'm in that terrible state and like people send me like really scary pictures and all this bad stuff, or strangers. So it's like, it's almost like they're acting out your family constellation around you when you're in psychosis out on the streets or something, or past lives. And this could be why, like, at times I like felt like I was shot, or I felt like this or that. Like, that could be like the morphogenetic field, me having to act out those old constellation events because it hasn't been acted out by like representatives in a safe space. I don't know if that makes sense, but since I'm sensitive to that, it's like coming out of my DNA, and then I have to re-experience it because it is in my DNA if it's in my lineage. So yeah, and I'm not going to go into what I do know about my lineage because I'm not going to talk about any of that on here, but it's just really interesting to have seen this exploration. And the other thing is, the notion of causality, this was my own insight, causes the self. The self is the cause of causality, of this happening and the next happening and the next happening and the next happening. All of that has created myself, my sense of self, from my own life as well as generations before. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it makes sense to me. And it causes this self-centeredness, and that's something that I've been pondering too lately, is this, all this like vitamin collecting and all this talking to myself obviously is like self-centered. I could be out there like helping other people. And I've talked about this before too, how I don't know if it's helpful to try to help other people or not, or if one can only really help oneself and then that helps others, because when one's in a better state of consciousness, it sort of ripples outwards. But I seem to go up and down like this, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I don't think I can help others, but I think that I can be kind of silly and crazy and maybe help others by being manic-y, like I don't want to help others in a logical way, like, oh, sorry, I'm sad, that sucks. I want to be like, silly and then see their reaction and then change and morph and move and play, kind of like this facilitator did. So I feel like it was a big clue for whatever it is that I do. And you know, I've talked about wandering and being crazy and having some kind of van and living in a van and just being synchronicity for others. And you know, I'm saying this now, but in like 2 months I'll be like, won't even be able to barely think or talk or move, and I'll want to kill myself. So that's the other thing about the self. Causality causes the self, but the self is the cause. The self, the feeling of separateness. There are no individual selves. There's the self, the separate self, which, you know, we each have, but it's all the same self. It's all a big mixture of everything, of every relationship and person interacting ever. Like, my family members 10 generations ago could have been neighbors with yours. And, you know, it's just all interconnected. So there is no private self. It's one big self. But we can drop that self and realize that we're each a human being and we're all friends. That sounds weird, but it's true. And I'm feeling this and seeing it more and more, and not really being as scared by it as I have been in the past. But so there is no self is the thing. It's all thought, it's all programming, it's all conditioning, it's all continuity, it's all causality, which isn't there. It's really hard to explain. So it's all the self playing itself out. And so that's what I liked about this too, is that one person was in the hot seat, but it applies to everyone. It applies to everyone because it's all the same pool of thought and misery and suffering and experiences that we're all drawing from. But there's something totally different. And that's what happens in so-called mania. So yeah, it was a cognitive dissonance, heart resonance, and I also learned that passive things like the light and the noise, you know, the fluorescent lights, iPad noise, like I can't process that stuff. That's more related to the spire breathing, but yeah. On another good note, I've been talking to myself on video for the last hour, and I've been breathing normally the whole time. No calm breathing, no focus breathing, no tense breathing, no activity breathing, just normal breathing. So that's good to know that doing this process isn't like tense breathing. So yeah, in summary, this Constellation group meetup felt like going subtly and gently into the crap that bubbles up after peak state of a long, slow curve up into so-called mania, which I feel like the stress of the nervous system builds up because there's creativity and energy, and then it crashes because it can't keep going because it's also a stress on the body that it's not used to, and it defaults and goes back into past stuff and all the reasons why one can't maintain that wonderful level of functioning because there's all this dysfunctional baggage hanging around in our DNA. So yeah, I really enjoyed that workshop. I'm going to go back again and find out more about it because I think it can help, because it really does provide a safe container to subtly and gently go into like a psychosis-like state. It's not psychosis, but it has a quality that's similar, but so much more gentle. And it gives the brain permission to do that thing that it tends to do in psychosis, but in a safe and gentle way, in a contained way. in a time-limited way. It's almost like when you take a drug, you know it's going to wear off. So when you go to this constellation thing, you leave and your brain's not still doing that, hopefully. At least it wasn't for me. But then it had an immediate effect in the field, for sure, in daily life. So yeah, super cool. Really, really fascinated by it.